TMZ posting a video today. In it, Harvey Levin says the author of this new email claims they can lead the FBI to these kidnappers. Listen.
Yesterday, June 26th, TMZ confirmed it received another email, the latest in a string of messages from a person who has been contacting them for months, claiming to know who took Nancy Guthrie. This time, the message says something new. The sender claims there is a hidden phone somewhere that holds video footage of Nancy with the people who took her, recorded on the day she allegedly died. They're demanding Bitcoin in exchange for its location. TMZ says it's confirmed the email came from the same person behind earlier messages, and the outlet has forwarded it to the FBI. Here's the detail that makes this update genuinely strange. In that same email, the sender explicitly denies something. They say they were not the one who called in the widely circulated tip that Nancy Guthrie is buried in a shallow, unmarked grave just south of the border near Nogales. That tip reportedly went to a Mexican nonprofit organization weeks ago, and it has shaped a lot of the public theorizing about this case ever since. Now we have the very person claiming inside knowledge actively distancing themselves from it. So either there are two separate people claiming knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's fate, or someone is lying to TMZ, or, and this is the possibility investigators can't rule out, none of it is real, and a vulnerable family is being extorted for cryptocurrency over a tragedy that's already gutted them for 5 months. This comes just days after one of the most significant developments in this entire case became public, a previously undisclosed second ransom note, sent back in February and kept secret by investigators ever since, which reportedly says Nancy Guthrie died shortly after she was taken. Today we're doing a complete deep dive, from the night she vanished, through the doorbell camera footage the FBI released to the public, through both ransom notes, through the theories respected investigators have floated and walked back, the internal friction inside the task force, and all the way up to the email that landed in TMZ's inbox yesterday. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why a case with this much physical evidence, DNA, bloodstains, 2 notes, a recorded suspect on camera, has gone 5 months without a single named suspect, and why the people closest to it keep changing their minds about what actually happened. Visual, subscribe, animation, bell icon. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is a case we're going to keep following as it moves, in real time, for as long as it takes. Let's get into it. Before we continue, a quick note. This video discusses an abduction, a presumed death, and unverified claims involving an elderly victim. Some details, including the contents of ransom communications, may be distressing. Everything in this video reflects publicly reported, sourced information current as of this upload. Nothing here is confirmed by law enforcement as fact unless specifically noted, and no suspect has been named or charged at the time of this recording. Viewer discretion is advised. Before this was a headline, Nancy Guthrie was simply Nancy. Born Nancy Ellen Long on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, she moved to the Tucson area with her family in the early 1970s and built a life there that spanned more than 5 decades. By the time she disappeared, she'd lived in the same corner of southern Arizona longer than most of us have been alive. She raised 3 children in the Catalina foothills area just outside Tucson. Her daughter Annie, a poet married to AP biology teacher Tommaso Cioni, her son Cameron, a retired military colonel, and her daughter Savannah, known to millions of Americans as the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. To viewers of that program, Nancy Guthrie was a familiar, beloved presence, the mom who showed up in segments, who Savannah spoke about warmly on air, who represented something stable and ordinary in a life otherwise lived in front of cameras. To her community, she was something simpler, a church-going 84-year-old woman who, in the months before she disappeared, had taken to watching her congregation's services online when she couldn't make it in person. Friends have described her as someone who kept a quiet, settled routine, the kind of life where a single missed Sunday morning would be noticed immediately by the people who knew her best. That routine, and how tightly it was woven into her daily life, is the thread that unraveled everything that followed. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner with family. Around 9:45 to 9:50 p.m., her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her home in the Catalina foothills. As far as anyone has been able to determine, he is the last person known to have seen her alive. Visual: exterior shot of a quiet desert suburb at night. Generic stock. The next morning, Sunday, February 1st, Nancy didn't show up at a friend's house to watch her church's live-streamed service, something she did regularly. It was such a small, specific deviation from routine that it triggered concern almost immediately. A member of her church reached out to the family to flag that she hadn't appeared. Relatives went to check on her around 11 a.m. They searched the house. They searched the surrounding property. There was no sign of her, but her phone and other essential personal items were still inside. Around noon, the family called 911. Pima County Sheriff's deputies responded, and within hours, this had escalated from a wellness check to a confirmed abduction investigation. Sheriff Chris Nanos told the public plainly that Nancy had not left on her own. A crime had been committed. Visual: FBI doorbell camera still, blurred/obscured per platform guidelines. On February 5th, the FBI released doorbell camera footage recovered from Nancy's home, showing a masked individual at her door in the early hours of February 1st. The figure, described as roughly 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, was wearing gloves, a black Ozark Trail backpack, and appeared to be carrying a holstered handgun. The footage shows the person apparently tampering with the camera itself, suggesting they were deliberately trying to limit how much evidence they left behind. Crime scene processing turned up bloodstains inside the home, which were later confirmed through testing to be Nancy's own blood. Combined with her missing presence and the camera footage, investigators had, within days, the outline of a violent, planned abduction, but almost nothing pointing toward who was responsible. What makes this case so unusual, even at this early stage, is the gap between how much physical evidence exists and how little it has revealed. Most cases like this break because the perpetrator has a documented connection to the victim, a relationship, a grudge, a financial tie. Here, investigators have repeatedly said they've found none of that. Whoever did this appears to be, at least on paper, a complete stranger to Nancy Guthrie. What followed was one of the largest missing persons mobilizations Arizona has seen in years. A multi-agency task force formed almost immediately. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, given Tucson's proximity to Mexico, and search and rescue teams combing the surrounding area. Cadaver and tracking dogs were brought in. Investigators canvassed not just the neighborhood but nearby gas stations, pulling surveillance footage in hopes of identifying a suspicious vehicle from the night Nancy vanished. A deputy was posted outside her home around the clock. A pair of gloves believed to belong to the suspect was recovered near the home, but when run against the National CODIS database, there was no match. Mixed DNA was also recovered from the scene, including a hair sample, but DNA analysis, especially mixed or degraded samples, can take months to process, and as of this recording it has not produced a named individual. The case drew attention well beyond Arizona. The White House posted appeals for information. President Trump called Savannah directly on February 4th to offer additional federal resources, and weeks later publicly raised the possibility of capital punishment for whoever was responsible. The family, for their part, offered a $1 million reward on February 24th, which combined with an FBI reward brought the total to $1.2 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Savannah suspended her regular anchor duties, including coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics, to be present for the search. She and her siblings released a direct video appeal addressed to whoever might be holding their mother, a request for proof of life, and an acknowledgement that in an era of manipulated images and AI-generated voices, the family needed unambiguous confirmation she was alive. That confirmation never came. Despite the manpower, despite the reward, despite the physical evidence, the investigation's public face has remained remarkably static for months. No suspect named, no arrest made. To understand why, we have to look at what was happening in private, because while the search played out publicly, two pieces of correspondence were being kept entirely out of view. One day after Nancy was reported missing, a note arrived at the tip lines of two local Tucson television stations and at TMZ. It was addressed directly to Savannah. It demanded a ransom, reportedly in the millions, payable in Bitcoin, and, critically, It contained specific details that strongly suggested the sender had either been inside Nancy's home or had detailed knowledge of it. A white-banded Apple Watch left on her bedroom floor, and a broken light on her back porch. Investigators have said these kinds of unpublicized specifics are part of why they considered the note credible rather than an opportunistic hoax. By February 8th, reporting indicated the demand had settled at $6 million, with a deadline of 5 p.m. the following day. On February 7th, Savannah posted a video statement that included a brief, direct line, "We will pay." The deadline passed. Then a second deadline passed. No exchange occurred. No further contact, as far as the public record shows, was made directly with the family. This is where the case takes its darkest turn, and where the most significant news of the entire summer broke just 5 days ago. On February 6th, a second note arrived, sent to a Tucson television station. Unlike the first, it made no financial demand. According to multiple outlets who've reviewed sourcing on the note, it stated that Nancy had died shortly after being taken, that her death had not been intended, and that whoever sent it was truly sorry. It reportedly described her as having perished shortly after she was taken, and used language suggesting her remains had been left somewhere in the open, phrasing close to, "She is buried in nature now." Investigators chose to keep the contents of this note out of the public eye for more than 4 months, reportedly out of concern that revealing it could interfere with the case or discourage further contact from whoever sent it. It wasn't until June 22nd that NBC News and other outlets confirmed what was inside it. Authorities believe both notes were likely sent by the same person or group, based on matching computer IP address data, and law enforcement sources have indicated they consider this second note potentially genuine, not a hoax layered on top of a real crime. When Savannah spoke to her former co-host Hoda Kotb in March, before the second note's contents were public, she said her family believed the 2 original notes were authentic, while noting that most of the dozens of other messages claiming insider knowledge that flooded in afterward were almost certainly not real. It's a detail worth sitting with. The family was, in effect, carrying private knowledge of a likely death for months while the public conversation around them continued to operate on the assumption that Nancy might still be alive. With that context, the public theorizing around this case has split into several competing directions, and it's worth walking through them honestly, because none of them have been confirmed. The first is the kidnapping gone wrong theory. Private investigator Dan Ribicoff, founder of the International Investigative Group, laid this out plainly in a BBC interview just 1 day ago. His read is that if Nancy died during or shortly after the abduction, whether by accident or violence, the case effectively became a murder investigation hiding inside what looked like a ransom case. In his view, that single fact would explain everything that's happened since. No ransom was ever collected, no further leads were generated through payment tracking, and whoever is responsible has likely gone quiet not because they got away clean, but because revealing anything more, including the location of her remains, would directly expose them to a far more serious charge. As Ribicoff put it, the perpetrator likely drove the criminal underground. The second thread involves the masked figure from the doorbell footage, who has been nicknamed Porch Guy across true crime forums and social media. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, appearing on the Megyn Kelly Show on June 23rd, said sources had told her investigators were closing in on identifying him, and that once they did, she expected significant additional evidence to follow. She also offered a sobering piece of context about why this is taking so long. Any agency working this case has to build it as though it's already headed to trial, anticipating that a skilled defense attorney will challenge every piece of physical evidence, which means investigators can't afford to move on a name until the case behind it is airtight. A third theory entered the conversation when the cybersecurity firm CertiK referenced the Guthrie case in a blog post as a possible example of what's known in the crypto security world as a wrench attack, a coercive, often violent attempt to extract cryptocurrency access from a victim or their family, rather than a traditional kidnapping for cash. Retired FBI agent and SWAT veteran Jennifer Coffindaffer called the designation a potential breakthrough on social media, reasoning that a company with CertiK's reputation in crypto security wouldn't apply that label publicly without having seen something substantive. When Sheriff Nanos was asked about it directly, he declined to confirm or deny the framing, but said he'd pass the report along to his investigative team. Visual: archived news montage, multiple pundits, contradictory captions. It's worth pausing here, because this case has become something of a case study in how true crime media covers an unsolved investigation in real time. CNN published a piece marking Nancy's 100th day missing that highlighted just how often on-air analysts have confidently declared, and then reversed, sweeping theories, that this was a robbery gone wrong, that she was taken across the border, that she never left Arizona, that this was a lone amateur, that this was a sophisticated, organized group, sometimes from the same commentator within weeks of each other. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst John Miller made the point that the public has been conditioned by procedural dramas to expect cases like this to resolve quickly through cameras and DNA databases, when in reality, cases without a personal connection between victim and offender are often the hardest to crack, regardless of how much technology exists. Behind the scenes, the investigation itself hasn't been free of tension. NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Enton, who has covered this case from Arizona for months, reported that a Pima County Sheriff's Sergeant described the early days of the joint investigation in blunt terms, characterizing coordination between agencies as badly disorganized, with detectives reportedly not even comparing notes on which witnesses had already been interviewed. Enton also revealed that the task force held what he described as a come-to-Jesus meeting around the 4-month mark. FBI agents and sheriff's detectives working the case full-time, taking stock of where they stood, and according to his sources, still coming up without a solid suspect or lead. Enton has been candid that his own theory has shifted over time. He initially leaned toward a ransom plot that went sideways, but has grown skeptical of that framing specifically because there was never any direct negotiation channel open with the family and never any proof of life offered. Two things a ransom-motivated kidnapper would typically want to establish. Separately, a report from the U.S. Sun, which Enton said he could not independently confirm, claimed Savannah has spent roughly $500,000 of her own money hiring private investigators and outside specialists, reportedly out of frustration that the official investigation alone wasn't moving fast enough. Sheriff Nanos has acknowledged criticism of how his office has handled communication, noting that he is not in direct contact with the family himself. That role has gone to the FBI. It's a small but telling detail about how a case this high-profile can create its own bureaucratic distance. The people most desperate for updates are often the furthest removed from the people gathering them. And then there's the detail tying directly back to our hook. At some point in recent weeks, a Mexican nonprofit organization received an unverified tip claiming Nancy was buried in a shallow, unmarked grave just south of the border near Nogales. Authorities have stated publicly that they have no evidence she ever crossed into Mexico. That tip has circulated widely online regardless, and it's the exact claim that yesterday's anonymous Tim's emailer went out of their way to deny having made, while simultaneously offering a brand new, equally unverified claim. A hidden phone holding video of Nancy with her captors, available in exchange for Bitcoin. TMZ has forwarded that email to the FBI. Whether it leads anywhere, or whether it's simply the latest entry in a long line of opportunistic and likely fraudulent claims trying to profit off this case, is something only investigators currently know. What we can say is that this is now at least the second distinct, unverified location claim tied to this case in recent months. First a grave near the border, now a hidden phone somewhere unspecified, and both arrived through unofficial, anonymous, payment-demanding channels rather than through law enforcement. As of this recording, it has been roughly 146 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. Sheriff Nanos has said he has a working theory of motive, but has chosen not to disclose it, stating that doing so isn't about secrecy for its own sake. It's about protecting whatever case prosecutors eventually try to build. What we can say with confidence: there was a planned, violent entry into Nancy Guthrie's home. There was real physical evidence left behind. There were 2 ransom communications that investigators consider potentially genuine, including one that suggests she did not survive the abduction. And in the void left by an unsolved case this high profile, a steady stream of tipsters, theorists, and, very likely, scammers have stepped in to fill the silence, some of them explicitly monetizing the family's anguish for cryptocurrency. That last point is worth sitting with for a moment. Whatever is eventually proven true about who took Nancy Guthrie, what's already verifiably true is that her disappearance has become a target for exploitation. Extortion emails, unverified grave tips, and pundits building entire segments on theories they'll abandon within the month. It's a pattern worth recognizing in true crime coverage generally, not just this case. The harder, less satisfying truth is that most of what's circulating online right now, including a lot of what gets packaged as a bombshell, is someone's educated guess, a leaked detail without full context, or in the worst cases, a deliberate attempt to profit off public grief. For Savannah Guthrie, the case has reshaped daily life in a deeply specific way. She's returned to anchoring today, but producers have reportedly put protocols in place for whenever news breaks on her mother's case during a broadcast, sequestering her from set and briefing her privately while a co-anchor covers the story on air. It's a strange, almost unbearable arrangement. A woman whose job is delivering the news now structurally shielded from being the one to deliver news about her own mother. Visual, family photo montage, faded. For the wider Guthrie family, Annie, Cameron, and the extended relatives who've spent 5 months pleading publicly for information, there has been no resolution, no proof of life, and now, a credible but unconfirmed indication that there may never be one. They've had to make consequential decisions, including how much of their own money and resources to pour into outside investigators, all while living under the kind of sustained public attention that very few families ever have to endure. The reward remains active. The tip lines remain open. And the task force, by all public accounts, remains working, even if, 4 and 5 months in, the breakthroughs keep arriving as rumors rather than arrests. What strikes me most about this case isn't the scale of the manhunt or the size of the reward. It's how ordinary the last normal night of Nancy Guthrie's life was: a family dinner, a ride home, a plan to watch church online the next morning, and how completely that ordinariness was severed by someone who, 5 months later, remains a complete unknown to the public, identified only by a backpack, a pair of gloves, and a nickname. We don't know yet whether yesterday's email is the break this case needs, or just the latest cruel exploitation of a family already living through the worst version of uncertainty imaginable. What we do know is that this story isn't finished, and we'll be back the moment something verifiable changes. If you have genuine information about this case, please don't leave it in the comments. Call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Submit it directly at tips.fbi.gov or contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. A $1.2 million reward is active for information leading to Nancy's recovery. If this video helped you actually understand where things stand, separate from the noise, the flip-flopping theories, and the anonymous emails chasing Bitcoin, do 3 things before you go. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch the next update the moment this case moves. Drop a comment with which theory you find most credible so we can keep the conversation grounded in what's actually verified. And share this with anyone who's been following the case but might be confused by the rumors circulating right now. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe.